From Sydney, Australia, all the way to Portland, USA, two misfits hang out after class to riff on the B-sides of professional life. These are your Professional Misfits. Hello friends from Sydney, Australia. I'm your host, Christopher Sellers.
From Portland, Oregon, I'm Brody Ipox.
And we are your Professional Misfits, and this is episode 3, and we're talking about creativity today. So, what is it? Is it important? Why don't we have it? How does it actually apply to our professional and personal lives? That's the gist of today's episode. Full disclaimer, it's a little bit self-indulgent. It is my world of expertise. I may have written a book about it. Brody may grill me on it. So that's going to be today's episode. Brody, I'm going to hand over the reins a little bit more to you, my man, because you've got all the questions and I'll have all the answers for today's discussion. What's on your plate?
Yeah, first off, I just want to say, so I've read the first 3 chapters.
Okay.
And then today, before our discussion, I went back and I actually read chapter 1 and 2 again. And man, I said it to you the first time I was reading it, but you've got a brilliant mind, sir. It's a very cool perspective. I love the way that translates.
That's very kind.
So,
I should probably insert here because I'm not good at self-promotion. So the book is titled Applied Creativity, right? So that's the title. The subtitle is Your Guide to Revolutionary Thinking and the 6 Skills to Unlock Your Creative Potential. So it can be found online. You can get it on paperback. You can get it in audiobook with my sexy voice narrating it. So that's the name of the book that we're talking about today. Sorry, Brady, I'll hand it back to you.
No, so let's just dive right in.
Okay.
The first question I had was that first chapter is the hotel room.
Yeah.
And wonderful chapter. I thought that the insights that you provided for that are pretty substantial. My first question when I got to the end of the chapter was, how long did it take him to break this down? Truly, because that to me really displayed your creativity, the way that you saw and attached the way that you feel and, look at certain things. And I was impressed. So I was also curious. I was like, that had to take some time.
Sure. Okay. So to give the folks at home some context, what I'll do is I'll read a tiny section of the introduction, just
Please.
so you've got an insight into how and why I wrote this book in the first place, because creativity is an awfully abstract, esoteric beast at the best of times. So this is the clearest example I can give of how and why I wrote the book and then brought it into a professional space. So in 2022, there was a report by the World Economic Forum that cited that the top 10 skills required by 2025 were skills like innovation, like complex problem solving, originality, and ideation. So basically creativity, for you and I at home. But it's the second half of the article where things take a turn. The World Economic Forum offers how we should develop our creativity and goes on to issue a shopping list of technical skills. Like skills like content writing, like sales, like marketing, like data entry, AI and cloud computing, and engineering. So the World Economic Forum and people in corporate and STEM, creativity is defined by its relevance to corporate and STEM and nothing else, right? So equally concerning is the logic that technical skills can develop creativity, which is a logic we've seen play out and fail in education at every level, everywhere for the last 200 years, right? So that's one half of the equation. So the second half of the equation is it's curious to me that those seeking creativity ignore fields where creative skills, intelligence, process, and outcomes are demonstrable, they're abundant, and they're replicable. So basically the arts, right? And when we use the word creative, we immediately associate it with the arts. So your ability to draw or dance or sing or act seems to define whether or not you're creative. But artists are known to be radical thinkers who thrive on inspiration and are capable of extraordinary feats. So to an artist, the corporate discussion of creativity makes as much sense as an opera ensemble discussing financial accounting. Yeah? So it's as if corporate and the arts speak two very different languages, both insisting they know what creativity is and both dismissing the other as irrelevant. End quote. So that should give you some context to the problems we face, the sort of part of the fundamental creative argument, and why I felt this book was absolutely of critical value is to demonstrate, well, neither of you are really correct. And the truth lies right here in this language and this skill set in the middle. So to Brody's point about the hotel room. So for those of you who haven't read the first chapter, if you're interested, you can actually download it for free from my website. I'll talk about that later, so you can read about the hotel room in full. The hotel room came about when I was designing learning and development skills assessments for corporate contracts. And then one day some guy comes along and says, look, if we wanted a scenario, like a role play scenario that could assess creative problem solving, could you do it? And I went, yeah, man, I can design anything.
Right. That's always the answer.
That's my first mistake. You know, I should have asked who were you first and who's it for.
Yeah, that's fair.
Then I find out, this is a guy in government intelligence, specifically intelligence operatives. So candidate spies is the short answer. And so they asked me to design a scenario for their candidates that would assess creative problem solving. So imagine the sort of candidates you're dealing with. They're highly trained in a field that is not mine. They're already very resourceful. They're already very intelligent. They're highly skilled, and this is a world that isn't mine. And they're asking me to design something that's going to assess their ability to creative problem solve. Now, what makes these guys and why I like military thinkers in general is because they have an awareness of disruption is something that we can't anticipate. And there is always something that we can't anticipate. So how do we train in that gray space, right? That's why they always have the edge and they have a really forward-thinking mindset. Corporate in general is everything's fine until, a financial crisis or a COVID or something comes along to upend the table.
Reactive.
Right, exactly right. Reactive. So one is proactive, one is reactive. So to discuss the hotel room, what I ended up doing was designing basically what is a sort of an escape room for these candidates. And the brief went along the lines of, this is a hotel room. Inside the hotel room is an Easter egg. Once you enter the hotel room, you've got 3 minutes to find the Easter egg, right? After 3 minutes, bad guys arrive. Once bad guys arrive, you have 60 seconds to escape. So if you fail to escape within that 60 seconds, we consider you dead. You lose, right? That's it. Game's over. What was interesting and why the hotel room became the first chapter of the book as a case study is over 90% of candidates failed. They all died. The testing instructor died. I freaked out because this is not what I expected to happen. Right, and if anyone knows how to bury a body, it's these guys. And in any other world, right? In any other world, if this was a corporate assessment, if there's a fail rate of more than 30%, they deem the test as too hard, and it's my fault, right? But this obviously exposed something critical that these guys were missing. And this is, again, why I love military thinkers, because, cool, you saw something, you found a weakness that we had. Awesome, because we didn't see that. Now, how do we train to improve it, right? Yeah. So this sort of gives you the overall view of the hotel room, why it was designed, the lessons they learned from that, and also the breakdown of, creative skill sets and linear skill sets. It's a very long-winded explanation. Your question was how long did it take me to design it?
Yeah. How long did it take you to get to the point that, you translate it so clearly. Seriously, guys, go read chapter 1. It's free. It's worth it. And, you'll see what I mean. There's a lot of intricacy in kind of woven into the simplicity of the challenge. It is really cool.
Thanks, man. I think I mentioned it in the book. The guys gave me the brief, and I left it on a Thursday, Friday. and I designed it over a weekend. And and then I messaged them, I emailed him on Monday saying, hey, yeah, I've got this thing, and I'm ready. And he's like, okay, like we generally allowed like 2 to 4 weeks. I'm like, yeah.
Okay, I was thinking 2 weeks maybe, but the 2 to 4, yeah.
Yeah,
like,
2 to 4
really
weeks. I'm like, no, I'm good. And he's like, well, do you know, what funds do you need? What resources do you need? And I'm like, not much, just like a training room and, you know, household items. Yeah, and of course they have that because they have, you know, green rooms and staging rooms they have for all this sort of shit. So they've got that already on a compound. So it didn't need any resources. And I learned that I learned the contractor hack as well. It's like if they give you 4 weeks, then deliver in 3, because then they think like, oh, you're savvy. You know, if you deliver it in 2 days, they're like, well, this is shit. Like, obviously,
okay.
Yeah, it's any graphic designer, any, you know, strategist or whatever. I didn't learn that rule until much later, I think. But
yeah, no,
again,
I just learned it now.
There you go. They get fun fact for everyone at home. If they give you, take 80% of the time, deliver within 80% of the time, and then you'll still get paid, and they think you're fantastic. So I delivered it in 2 days, which I thought was, you know, that's super impressive. Let's go. And like, well, fucking like, so already you've got a civilian contractor who's just knocked something up in a weekend, who said, I don't need any resources. We'll just use what you've got. And so all of them just had this and you know, and again, these aren't, I mean, like, military are generally pretty, you know, pretty, teams oriented, pretty pack oriented, have a certain attitude of themselves. Intelligence is like another level above, right? Because now you've got those guys and they're smart as fuck. And I kind of had to be escorted to and from, because their job is, I need information. And I'm going to get information from you any way I can. And so if I have to beg, borrow, bully, steal, flirt, intimidate, I use every human tactic to leverage any, you know, grain of info from me. Because, of course, they're wondering, like, who's this civilian kid wandering around the compound? Why is he walking around with trainers? And what the fuck is this? You know? They sort of had to insulate me from that, which is really, really interesting. So the short answer is the hotel room took a weekend to design, but I do qualify this later in the chapter as well. It's like what you see as 2 days is supported by 10 to 15 years of professional creative application of designing scenes, creative scenes, corporate scenes, all of this sort of stuff. So there's a wealth of experience, like every musician, you know, that just picks up an instrument and jams. You're like, you motherfucker. It's like, yeah, you don't see you know, you don't see the 15 years where they've been training solo, right? So that's more specifically what it was. But it was, I guess it was more to your point, because what you're really asking is, how did you break their system? That's what you're really asking, not how did you make up this scene? Because, so this is where creatives really understand what the fuck's going on, because most things in the universe operate with systems and rules and process, and corporate's big for it. The military is the same. They have SOPs, they have standard operating procedures and all these sorts of things. So with the specific skills that these guys wanted me to assess, and creative problem solving being one of them, I get them to walk me through like their standard operating procedures for things. So like if you had to enter into a room or anything like that, like what would be, you know, steps 1, 2, and 3, and how would you approach the situation? So with that information, I then think, well, what if I take all of your options away? Can I design a scene where none of your standard options are available? And what would that look like?
Okay.
So it's sort of this counterintuitive thinking. It's the same way that security specialists works. Like, you built a system. If I had to hack this system, how would I do it?
Yep.
And the reason why the hotel room is A, chapter 1, B, timely, and C, sort of significant, is that the principle of the hotel room is it represents disruption. Is that when we live in a world where there's standard process, there's standard business, there's standard transactions, and everything's fine, and then everything goes wrong at once. It's like, well, shit, this is unpredictable. It's like, yeah, unpredictable things happen. And that's and that's the difference between intelligence, these guys, and people who operate like that, and your standard startup, your standard corporate, your standard strategic creative thinker, fuck whatever. It's like, no, disruptions happen. So if and when they do, how do you adapt? How do you problem solve when your standard solutions actually compound your problem, right? How do you think how do you think outside your training? And that's specifically what creative problem solving is like, you have training, you have to leverage that. Now, how do you think outside of that when your training is insufficient, fails, or delivers not the right result? So, and then what was really cool with the hotel room specifically is there was one girl, candidate number 7, and she was the only one who survived the hotel room and came up with an optimal creative solution and survived. And she walked out in 18 seconds where everyone else died. And so we asked, like, well, how did she do it? Like, she must be magical, she must be creative. And she's like, no. So the chapter breaks down the story of this is how and why it worked. This is how she succeeded where others didn't. No, it wasn't magic. It's specific skill sets. Here's how you apply them in your own life. Well, I hope that's demonstrated. At the very least, that was the goal.
Yeah, you did it. You did a fantastic job. And
I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, I did. It's just an interesting look at how many people, like you said, would be in that circumstance or in that scenario, and they would die or they would fail. And
that's sort of the key thing. Like, most of us listening will go, well, shit, I'm never in high pressure situations like that. I'm never in situations that are life or death. I'm like, it's all a bit extreme. It's a great story, Chris. It's a bit extreme. I'm like, sure, you might not literally be in a situation like that. However, the principles are still the same. If you've ever had a partner walk out on you in the middle of a good relationship, that's called disruption. Right. If you've ever had your job taken away from you and now your financial future is threatened, that's called disruption. You know, if you're ever lost in a foreign city and your phone isn't working, right? So personally, we all have them. Like the micro and the macro, like professionally, we all have them. So when these things happen, when the thing that you can't predict happens, and when you've done everything right and it still fails, there's good, better, and best. How do you get by? How do you survive? And then how do you thrive? How do you step from what you were saying before, reactive, to a proactive solution within disruption? Like, that's the key. And you can only do that with creative skill sets and intelligence.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. Does
that make sense?
No, it does.
Cool.
It makes me excited for my next question.
It's something I believe very firmly about, Brody.
Yeah, I can tell. Yeah. So, I mean, my next question is, you reference, I think it might be in chapter 1 as well. A lot of the times that's why gimmicks and hacks don't work, because they're trying to shortcut that standardized process, not think outside of it. And, so my question to you was, and obviously in this scenario, it's kind of the same thing, a shortcut or a gimmick wouldn't necessarily work in that challenge.
It doesn't, and it didn't. And it's demonstrated how and why. And well, even more to the point, it's something I call the magic trick paradox, right? Where I could show you a magic trick, make a card, like the card that you chose, appear in my pocket, teleport it from one side of the room to the other, blow your mind. Holy fuck, it's magic, right? Now, if I show you a second time, or even go back and sort of walk you through the steps I took to do it, all of a sudden, like retroactively, you can piece it together for yourself, and retroactively you go, oh, is that it? Like, it's not impressive. It's like the illusion disappears. It's not creative. It's not magic. It's really quite simple.
Right.
And you go, yes, that's true. However, just because you might understand how something is done does not mean that you could do it for yourself. There's a massive leap, right? Just because, like, I know that a guitar is an instrument that can be played and you hit chords really doesn't mean that I can do it for myself, right?
Fair.
And creative outcomes suffer from this all of the time. Like before it was demonstrated, it did, like Uber's a great example, right? Uber came out of nowhere, and then all of a sudden the world collectively goes, oh, why didn't we see that before? It was always there. You just didn't see it. Similar to these disruptive circumstances. So in the hotel room, you know, I show you C7's solution first. This is how she solved it. This is what she did. And like, oh shit, yeah, so easy. Like, yeah, and the answer is there all along. And they go, well, it makes sense. It's a quick solution. It's an easy solution. Now you know how to solve the hotel room. Is it an optimal solution? And this is where we have this discussion of, can you tell the difference between a solution, a better solution, and then your optimal solution? And how do you vet that? Yeah. Because there's this sort of understanding, or this academic belief that, well, we can't measure creativity, right? We can't, it's just completely subjective. It's based on what I like, you know, and that's, I use this example to demonstrate that's not true. And even if you can simulate hacks, like a lot of, you know, once Uber was born, how many Uber knockoffs are there? Right. And that's the thing, you copy what's been done, but you still don't innovate on the Uber model. You still don't offer anything original from the Uber model. So you're still reactive. You're still playing catch up. And when you're working with, you know, intelligence, military, high performers who play to win, like not play to compete, but play to win, being reactive is not an option. Yeah. So how can you shift your creative thinking to that proactive, peak optimal mindset?
Yeah, well, it kind of leads me, you know, into the second half of that question, and it is then why sometimes do they work, and is that because they're being modeled after something that is innovative enough that there's low points of saturation and the entry is okay, or you know, because I see it a lot in social media. You know, there are people that will take a gimmick or a hack, and the content might be straight hot garbage, but because they used a hack or a trending sound or a trending technique, it blows up, you know, and that's kind of a poor model in terms of that, because it's more statistically evident in social media, but in any circumstance.
It is, it's true. I mean, this is how trends are formed, right?
Right.
Well, first something hot, fresh, and original bursts onto the scene. That's the first key thing we need to be aware of. Then everyone tries to figure out how that worked and why, and then replicate that. So you've got the trendsetter who is proactive. You've got everyone else that is reactive. Now, there's not to say that, you know, you can take fundamentals and make a solid stab at it, build a solid business. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. My question is, and sort of my critique is, that's easy and everyone does it. It's that it's high school logic of, we've taught you a thing, now replicate the thing in your own words. And I'd rather not, I'd just copy paste.
Right.
And so much of socials, so much of branding, so much of innovation, straight up, is copy paste. Innovation sort of lost its original meaning of, like, to improve a system, tool, or process, you know, to offer something new, to move the needle, right? It's like, no, well, because they were innovative, if we copy what they've done, now we're innovative. You're like, like, the fuck? And this is what, right? But it's, and this is the thing. And so, because it's compound, Brody, like, it's lazy thinking. And then when, I guess it's the philosophical point, when disruptions happen, and they always, like GFC 2008, there's a war in Europe, there's a coming recession, there's, you know, COVIDs and all these sorts of things. When disruption happens, you're fucked.
Yeah, because you lack the skills.
It's two things. There are now no trendsetters.
Yep.
Because what was working before now doesn't. And because you've relied on lazy thinking and lazy process, you do not have the readily available skills to adapt, to innovate, to problem solve, to manage your emotions, to any of these things. right? It's that status quo thing. If we just copy what's being done, we're safe, it's comfortable. And unfortunately, look, economics don't lie, and there's that corporate logic of like, well, being a trendsetter is risky. It makes much more sense to be a very close second. And objectively, I understand that. Objectively, you wait for a demonstrated market, you wait, you have more security in moving into that space. But again, the reason why Uber was so successful and made such a mark is because they were first. The reason why PayPal, they were first. The reason why, who's the other one that I always draw on? Airbnb and Facebook. Like two other examples, like all proactive disruption, all designed, they were first. And this is just corporate. Talk about the arts, man. Mm-hmm. This is like, you can get away with replicating things in corporate. In the arts, you absolutely fucking cannot.
Oh, you're a hack if you do.
Yeah, that's it. You cannot, and you will be called out immediately. Anyone who's Tarantino-esque, immediately immediately called out and discredited. Anyone that's Bowie-esque, immediately called, like, both iconic. You'll never touch them. Do your own thing.
Yeah.
So if there was one gem of advice, is like corporate startups and all of you at home should take an artist principle of find your fucking edge, find your voice, find your originality, and lean into that. That's
yours. Yeah.
And if we're talking in the world of social media, which is your world, what's the one thing that you have that nobody else has that can't be replicated?
Fair. Yeah.
Right?
And I think, to your point, that's an assessment I think everybody needs to make, right? And for me, I mean, I fundamentally have my own things. And if I had to boil it down to one word, it's unapologetic. And that seems to, leverage my other messages as well. So it's convenient, but you're exactly right. If I hadn't identified that and I didn't know, I would have literally zero to lean into. There's just that one perspective helps me within my own creative process know, because that is me. I've identified that edge or that piece that I can now run with, and I can, like we talked about, train. I can train that muscle. I can train that instinct. And if I don't, then
yeah. And all of this, and again, like, this is the thing, like, all of this, and any artist will tell you, is this takes time, it takes craft, it takes self-reflection. It's that sort of myth of like, well, we're all unique individual snowflakes. And I'm like, yeah, but no, you're a lot of you are much more generic, because it's safe, and that's cool. But if we're talking specifically about creativity,
how triggered do you think a bunch of people that just got listening, listening to this just got? Well,
I mean, sure, like you're not listening to us to be vanilla.
No, that's fair.
But it's oh shit. What was I saying?
I apologize.
Originality. No. Okay, so creativity by definition is atypical. Right, atypical from the standard. So if we're talking about anything else in the world, there's nothing wrong with conforming. There's nothing wrong with doing the same thing. There's nothing wrong with using hacks. There's nothing wrong with this. But if you're specifically talking to me about creativity, and by definition that requires you to be original and atypical, then that is going to force you, unfortunately, to take a real fucking hard look at yourself and say, well, what am I bringing and what am I offering? And I specifically say this after having a chat with a startup guru, I shouldn't say guru, a startup professional last night. Okay. Because, last week I came up with this amazing idea for this app, banking finance app. I ran it by you. You and I both think it's great. Talked to another colleague. He thinks it's amazing. I talked to Ivaldis in Lithuania. The first thing he says to me is like, do you have any market research? Okay. Is this something that a user needs? You get good rule of thumb, get 100 surveys, to sort of poll where they're at and whether they actually need this. The second thing is, how do you know this doesn't exist? Right? So here's Christopher S. Sellers, executive creative consultant, thought leader, author, all this sort of shit, has this amazing app idea. And the first qualifier is, how do you know this doesn't already exist? you should do your research. Do you understand how saturated fintech is? Do you understand? And I'm like, shit, you're absolutely right. So now, as much as I'm in love with my idea and my product and all this and the value it could bring, I have to now evaluate it against the world, and this is going to be a humbling fucking experience. And this is just an external project. This isn't me or my personality.
Right.
Right. So, and if I have to go through something like this as a trained artist who's kind of used to, you know, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, then the average Joe and the average Jane, who probably isn't used to having their ideas critiqued, or probably isn't used to having their board investment questioned, might have to, you know...
Right, yeah, might hit a little bit harder, yeah.
Right, so might have to start vetting, vetting their ideas and vetting their process just a little bit more stringently. Like, if you want it to be effective. That's my take.
Yeah, that kind of leads me perfectly into the next question, you know, and I have an opinion on it, but I want to hear yours first. Do you then think that creativity is more natural to some? And if you do, then why?
Okay. I have sort of two answers.
Okay.
The first answer is no, because we use that as an excuse. They're creative, I'm not. They're born that way. They're talented. They can dance. They can draw. They can speak languages. Brody's talented because he knows how to tattoo on himself, and I could never do that. Right?
Okay.
So number one is it's an excuse.
Crutch. Yeah.
Right. If we peel away the layers, all right, arguably we could say yes. But again, I will qualify this with an analogy. If you look at the NBA, the majority of players on the NBA playing at the peak level are black, over 6 foot, and American. So for the casual observer, we would look at the NBA and decide, if I want to play basketball, I have to be black, over 6 foot, and American. Now we already know, well, this isn't quite true. Like, cool. So if we start to critically evaluate this, like, do I need to be American to play professional basketball at like a peak level? No. Okay, great. Do I need to be black to play professional basketball at an elite level? Well, that's not necessarily true. It's like, well, do I need to be 6 foot in order to play basketball at professional level? It's like, well, not necessarily. Now, we can argue it is advantageous to be over 6 foot. Nothing I have control over, but it is advantageous if I want to play basketball or volleyball or netball or, right, advantageous. And it may be advantageous genetically if I was African American. Just, you know, genetics and build up and all these sorts of things. That's cool. Not so much if I want to be a swimmer, right?
Okay.
So there's the hard truths of, like, yes, genetic chemistry and makeup contribute, and some things may be beneficial, but that's where I'll leave it, because anyone who's talented at anything or proficient or skilled or became a master in their craft never relied on natural talent. And there's a really excellent article that I read recently on LinkedIn, and I did share it, about how they were analyzing chess players. Actually, psychologists were studying world's top 10 chess players, and this is sort of a parallel to all other professions, is that the higher up the scale that they were and the more they researched it, the more they found that innate talent had less to do with success as, like, the discipline, the commitment, the drive, the time in. And this is generally what I say when it comes to creativity and creative skills. The reason why we collectively lack creativity and creative intelligence globally, is we don't practice these creative skills and we don't value them. develop the skills, put the time in, you would be more creative. Like it's the same with any profession. It's the same with any hobby. It's the same with any craft. So the more time you put in, the more proficient you will become. Like Brody, you don't rely you don't rely on, you know, being a misfit to make tattoos. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's
right.
fair.
You stencil out yourself. You put the time in. You pick up a needle and go, shit, I'm going to do this. I know these are going to suck, but I'm going to put the time in because I know in 5 years or so I'm going to be a lot better.
Yeah.
You know, and then I'll worry about tattooing somebody else. You know, but for right now, like, you're putting the time in. And that's the thing. It's a funny thing that the genetic argument only really comes up when it comes to creative pursuits. If someone was a surgeon or a bus driver, we never say they were born to drive a bus.
Right.
You know, they were born to be a nurse. They were born to be a doctor. They're just naturally gifted, right? But we always use this excuse, and it is an excuse when it comes to dancers, when it comes to musicians, when it comes to actors or any, like, in the arts. We disassociate skill and craft. We just go, well, that's over there. It's magic. They're special.
Okay. Yeah, no, okay.
What's your take? What's your take?
So it kind of has evolved a little bit since you gave your explanation. I'm kind of in the same boat that I think there are things and circumstances that are definitely advantageous and can nurture a creative process more than others. Absolutely. Do I think that each of us inherently has a different level? No, I don't. I think that, like you said, you know, there's a difference. A master wasn't always a master.
Correct.
That's a ridiculous thought. You know, he spent hours and hours in doing it over and over and over again until it was a reflex, and it was you know, it was that muscle memory that is now serving him. But inside of that, he spent a lot of time failing. He spent a lot of time trying something new or trying something different, discovery. So, short answer, no. I don't think that anybody has a natural efficiency to be more creative than others. I think, like you said, I think what has happened is the narrative has changed, and there are some, you know, examples of people that can step outside of that, I suppose. But even then, I mean, if you know, to your analogy about the NBA, you look at some of the greatest of all time, and one of the most consistent things that they tell you, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, they practice twice as much as the other guys. Yeah.
There's I think it's a book on my shelf. I don't know if it's Slow or I don't know if it's one of the other ones, but it's basically makes the case between, you know, the amateur musicians in the orchestra ensemble as opposed to the soloists. And the difference was individual personal practice. Like, so that's time alone in a room working on your craft.
Discipline.
Now, right. Now, this is not to say, it's not to attach a moral judgment either way. It's to demonstrate that the difference between average creative and exceptional creative is time in. And the reason, a little bit to your point as well, is that the reason why I break it into 6 skills, and like 2 of which are innovation and problem solving. Now that fits neatly in STEM, you know, STEM and corporate, like, because we apply those skills often. And so we can sort of point to that and go, well, that's creative because. And then I offer, well, what about emotional intelligence? Right. So an actor's ability to step in the skin of someone else and to portray that truthfully. Like, we all recognize that's creative, but do you identify like the ability to flex emotional intelligence, like on command, mind you? Do you identify that as creative? Like, obviously it is. Like, and a singer demonstrates the same thing, right? And an artist, a good photographer, demonstrates that same emotional connection through the lens, through the tool, to capture what they want to convey, right? So we all, lay people, recognize this as creative, But it's fascinating that the World Economic Forum and corporate and STEM and such don't. So it's they want to piecemeal this thing. And this is why we have this terrible, terrible disconnect of people who aren't artistic feel they weren't born into it and they're not creative. And then people who are artistic or creative in that way feel they're stupid because they don't get math, science, and working in the 9 to 5. So there's a horrible disconnect for both. And to be honest, that's really what I'm trying to heal right in the middle here. You know what I mean? It's like, well, when you isolate innovation and problem solving to tech only, you're really cutting your legs out from underneath you. And if you don't understand emotional intelligence in tech, there's a reason why 9 out of 10 startups fail, because your product doesn't connect with an audience. Let's, for instance, that's the example off the top of my head. Right. And likewise over in the arts, like you're not stupid because you couldn't. I still can't work out percentages.
That's fair.
I either have to Google it or like put it through a calculator and go, what the fuck am I trying to do? You know what I mean? But and this is the thing. It's the book. The book really is, and I make this case. I don't know whether we're going to get to it with your questions. It's like we don't so much have a creativity problem. We have a values problem, and in this society, and unfortunately, I see it getting a lot worse before it gets better. We don't value creative skills in the same way that we value, math, all the schools that the fucking World Economic Forum recommends that we should take to develop creativity. No, that's insightful, man. I think the biggest thing for me is, as someone who's identified as creative throughout their life, this is it's a weird conversation. And you bringing up the point that, the people that don't identify as creative have kind of compartmentalized that away. Yeah. Is so true. And it's so crazy because, again, I view myself as creative or artistic, and I come across these people, for instance, my grandmother and sister are perfect examples. They don't think they're creative. They think they're crafty, and that can be done by rules and reading directions, but there's things that you can do within the rules and the directions that make you creative. And they both are, so I've been working really hard with them over the last couple months to get them to start their own damn business, because that disconnect was so visceral to me. I was like, oh my God, how do you guys not know? It's absurd. And you continue to look at me as someone that's creative and can problem solve. You can do the same thing. You essentially are. You're just doing it in a different realm, and you're identifying it in a different way. Yeah, absolutely. There's a really lovely story of my aunt's partner, Steve. He's the most blue collar dude that ever blue collared anything in his life, and worked at like a car manufacturer for probably about 20, 30 years, something like that, right? And sort of guy that dropped out of school at 15 to do whatever, because like he wasn't good at school and he was stupid, right? Now this guy finds a vacant acreage one day, buys that, builds his house from scratch on that land, turns that acreage into an all-Australian botanical garden, right? And I'm talking completely landscaped front to back, to the point now that they have tour buses that come by like every fortnight to pick berries and do whatever and to do a lap around the thing. Now, Steve would eat KFC and drink Diet Coke all day if you let him, right? And he swears he's not a smart guy. He can walk around his own property and he can point to every plant. He can name every plant in Latin. He can tell you why that plant is put next to that one because they have a symbiotic relationship. They can tell you, right? So unbelievably intelligent in that respect. And built his house from scratch. He built it by scratch, from the ground up, and then built this entire property around it, which would have taken years, right? probably a decade. But he's still the sort of humblest dude that will shuffle along and go, "Oh, I'm not that bright. Like, let's go see a Marvel film." And you're like, "Bruh, like," and there's something. Look, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievably precious to me. At the same time, like, it's tinged with a little bit of sadness, because I hope one day you sort of get to see yourself in the light that my aunt sees you, because she obviously adores you and recognizes all of this stuff in you. And he's pushing 60, right? So here's a guy that's grown up for 60 years thinking he's not smart. And,
that's the system. It's like you said.
It's also a values thing, because if we had a sort of equivalent set of values for certain professions and certain skills that we do for others, you know, we wouldn't probably just like slump our shoulders and bow our head when we said we worked in manufacturing. You know? Yeah.
No.
And the same thing as being an artist, man. Like, Australia has a horrible culture for it. Like, I got more respect standing behind a coffee machine making coffee than I ever did saying, "Look, I'm an actor and a writer."
Oh, well, I'll be honest with you. It's kind of that's the same way in the States too. I mean,
that's interesting.
Yeah. If you were to pursue arts, or, you know, for instance, I'll make the example, you know, there's some people in my hometown that are pursuing music. They don't get the support that they should. They make good music.
That's interesting.
They are doing things that other people aren't, and it's interesting to watch, because like you said, you'll then turn around and see someone post that they were at the copy shop for 10 hours and they had a great day, and that has 110 likes and everybody adores you, and you provided a substantial service, kind of deal. And that it sounds like I'm being abrasive to that, and it's not. It's just, like you said, the identification of creativity. Like, it is a very beautiful thing when you can see their creative process, when you can see the problem solving, when you can see the connection. That it's beautiful. And like you said, I think a lot of people are programmed out of that, and it is just the saddest thing.
And and it's interesting to hear you say that, because I was of the assumption that the States, it was a bit more accepting, but the big game changer for me was moving to London in my 20s. And like the thing that really struck me about London is, like, every little suburb, like little fucking backward suburb, every suburb had a theater, every theater had a show, every show had an audience that would go and see it. And I'm like, this is like the land of Oz to me. Like, what the fuck? And I could still stand behind a bar, mix Manhattans. People say, "What do you do?" I'm like, "Actually, I'm an actor and a writer." And they're like, "Cool, what are you working on?" Like,
right.
And this was a total perspective shift and a whole new world for me, because I could pursue what I desperately loved, right? And if I could drive a bus and be happy, I'd do that. But this was my thing, and to live in a world, in a society where it was just like not valued or dismissed or kicked to the curb, it's exhausting. And then to be in a world for the first time and sort of, lift your chin up and look someone in the eye and say, "Well, I'm an actor and a writer," and like, fucking cool, what are you working on? And so oh shit, I've written this thing, and then you get talking about books and literature and all that sort of stuff. So If nothing else, I would really hope that if you read the book, it provides that sense of, do I want to say equilibrium? I don't know, but it sort of like brings this permission into your world of, like, you can do this thing, it is viable, they're life skills and they're absolutely critically necessary, and you can apply them. The best thing about creativity is it's free.
Like I said, I'm trying not to get too caught up in that, identifying that there's a lot of people out there that are, you don't know whether it's programming or, values or, circumstance or, just time. it's just an incredibly interesting thing. Yeah, I think there's a lot more people out there.
Here's a story from the book that you may have read up to. I'm not sure, but I know everyone at home will identify with. So when there's 3 examples, but I'll give one. I went to, a friend of mine took me to a nude life drawing class, right? For my birthday. So I can't draw, but I'm like, oh, I'll go for fun. You know what I mean? Like, I know I'm creative. I know I'm good at other things. I can't draw, but I'll go for fun. So we go down to this, downstairs bar, wine, cool people, nude model, great. And I start drawing. Within the first 5 seconds of what I'm drawing, I'm like, this is shit. This is bad, Chris. And I'm looking around and everyone else is just like drawing with ease and it's all coming together. And it's like, it's not even abstract. And I'm like, fuck. And like, you feel shame and I start to panic. And then I'm like, all right, just turn the page, like start again. And I start again and it's no better and it's probably worse. And I'm like, what the fuck is this? So it's not just, I couldn't draw, but then the shame, the guilt, the responsibility, the fault that I can't draw. And, I'm a grown man downstairs with other adults and I'm feeling childlike shame and stupidity because I can't draw the thing that's in front of me and everyone else can and it's so easy. And I'm like, fucking Jesus. So I wanted to leave. I checked the time. It's been like 5 minutes. The session lasts for 90. I'm like, fuck, I'm not going to get through this. You're writing little secret
notes to your buddy. Like, can we go?
Bro, you don't even understand. And you're hiding your work. You know what I mean? So you've got the arm up, you're like covering and just like, and so I get through the 90 minutes and whatever else. I'm like, fucking Jesus, I survived it. But I'm joking to my mom about this exact story later. And I'm like, tell her, geez, it was a nightmare. It was like, I'm writing this book on creativity and the irony that I can't fucking draw. And she's like, oh, you used to love to draw until Mr. Butler threw your picture in the bin. And I went, what? She's like, oh, you don't remember this? I'm like, no. It's like, oh, yeah. When you were in year 8, so I might have been about 7 or 8 years old, you drew a portrait of your teacher in full color over the weekend. You took it into him on a Monday morning, and apparently he looked at it, crumpled it up, and threw it straight in the bin. And you never drew again.
Oh, my God.
And I don't remember this.
You blocked it out.
Right? But so here's the thing, and this is the root to a lot of this, I'm not creative, is that in our youth, we're at the mercy of peers, of teachers, of school friends, we're at the mercy of everyone. And we don't yet have the skills or the awareness to filter who's talking shit,
right,
and who's genuine. And so if you have someone like a teacher or a parent say, you can't do that, or just, trash your thing. A psychologist friend of mine, Cherie, older woman as well, had a really, really similar story where she was singing around the house once and her dad stopped her politely and said, it's okay, I can't sing either. Oh my God. And she never sang again. Right? So when we understand that as children, singing, dancing, drawing, these artistic expressions are generally it's an emotional expression. Like I'm showing you my world. I'm sharing my inner world with you. So then to be rejected, dismissed, or ignored,
detrimental.
Like why would you ever go back? Like you put your hand in the fire once.
Right. Yeah.
I learned my lesson, right? Which is so.
And you
which
can't
is also
blame
why
them. You can't blame them.
No. It's a natural childlike response. And then, so then I was 8. And so fast forward to in my 30s and I'm feeling that shame because I can't draw. And I'm trying to figure out, why do I feel like this? It's ridiculous, and this is for us who are self-aware humans. So your average Joe and Jane who may or may not be that self-aware is just like, no, I can't draw. And that's a certified fact. Or I can't speak languages, right, or I can't dance, or I can't X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So I'm not creative. And so this is a massive unconscious bias that you're generally trying to wrestle with. And so hopefully what the book does is go, look, there's these 6 creative skills and you can universally apply them to anything. You probably do it already, and you probably do it intuitively, and they're universal. So have a play.
Yeah, I'm so excited about this episode coming out. And I mean, seriously, I think the big thing that you and I have talked about a lot, right, is that in these conversations, you know, we break down things that, you know, to some might be abstract, to some might be hard to identify with. But at the same instance, there's almost a piece in every conversation we've had that allows you permission as the listener, you know, that says, oh, okay, you know, there is a different way to look at this thing.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I mean, we should have this conversation at least once a month, so people can get a little bit updated.
And just, you know, and just for a little bit of homework, if you guys are listening at home, like, guaranteed you have a story like my primary school teacher. So have a think for a moment. And then in the comments, if you can you tell us, like, who it was for you who said, well, you can't dance, or you can't sing, or you can't draw, or stop being so loud, you know, any of that. And then think about whether that's, you know, true or not. But I'd love to hear your guys' perspective, because there's always, whenever anyone says I'm not creative, it's always the same story. Someone somewhere said at some stage, you can't do this.
Yep. I mean, and if you guys want to take the homework a step further, identify that person, and then picture me and Chris. I mean, you can do that too, but just imagine me and Chris behind him, okay?
That's it. So, hey man, I just want to talk. Just want to talk.
We have some words for you, sir.
That's it. All right. Do you have any like final questions, or is this a pretty solid place to wrap up?
This feels like a great place to land.
All right, man. Hey, thanks for taking the time to read. Like, you personally, thanks for taking the time to read. Like, for you guys at home, I didn't ask him to. We kind of just like threw creativity on the board. It's like, we have to do an episode about it because it's something we both passionately care about and see a need for. I didn't want to turn it into, you know, the Chris's Book podcast, but I'm really grateful that you read the book and we got a chance to talk about it here. And if you guys are interested, like, man, just reach out and let's talk about it. You can download the first chapter for free. If you want to find it anywhere, it's on Spotify, iTunes, Audible, or the audiobook places. Search for Applied Creativity. Search for my name as Christopher S. Sellers. That seems to bring up more prompt results. You can definitely find it on Amazon. And if you're around Australia, you can definitely get it on Booktopia as well. You can also get it from me. And you can download the first chapter from me as well. And that's www.cssellers.com. Brody, if people want to find you offline or wherever, where can we get a hold of you, my man?
You guys can find me on LinkedIn or TikTok. LinkedIn's going to be Brody Ipox, and you'll find me talking about my channel Outside Art Class.
It is. You're still in the 30-day challenge of doing tasks?
Yeah, so I've been filming them. I've been filming them. I have to have a very realistic look of what these 30-day challenges look like, and that I am a 30-year-old man and not a 20-year-old guy that has all the time in the world to tattoo himself in the background, you know. So it's going good. It's an eye-opener, to say the least.
Nice. Coming up next, we've actually got our first guest.
Yes.
We're gonna have our first threesome. It's gonna be an all-male threesome. I'm bringing on my boy Tony Albrecht. We're gonna be discussing, you know, career changes, like what happens when you change careers, what happens when you change industries. You know, are you allowed to? And then what happens when you do, and all the creamy, grainy middle. Tony's got a really interesting story about that as well. So I have him telling his story. Brody, I know between you and I, we've probably got like 50 random jobs and careers and stuff in between us. So if you're at home and you're kind of, you know, you're in flux, or you're trying to figure out what to do next, and it all feels overwhelming and you're a little bit disoriented, that's normal. And tune in, because we'll be unpacking this sort of stuff and getting down the nitty gritty, because it's not you know, it's not always clean, it's not always fun, and you never want to tell people like, oh, I'm in transition or I'm trying to figure things out. So, Brady, you looking forward to anything in the next episode?
I mean, it might not. I might just be viewing this threesome, but
there's always one who just sits in the corner and watches.
I'll be the fluffer.
I love it.
But yeah, no, I'm excited about having a guest. I'm excited about this topic as well. I think it's affecting a lot of people right now, and
yeah,
the world feels dark. So, you know, if we can shine a little light, then I'm always happy about it.
That's great take. So in the meantime, friends, you stay classy. I've been Christopher Sellers.
And I'm Brody Ipox.
And you stay classy, Misfits.